In Genesis 39 now, we come to see Joseph, who had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, the Egyptian officer, and he was a servant. And we see that God had a tremendous purpose for Joseph, and the training that he gave to Joseph to fulfill that purpose was first of all to be a slave. Just like Jesus, Joseph had to learn to be a servant. He could not exercise authority until he had learned submission. As we have often said, there are many young people growing up who will never be able to exercise spiritual authority in their lives because they have never in their life learned spiritual submission. From their earliest youthful days, they've been a law unto themselves, and therefore they grow up, and because they've never learned submission in their younger days, God can never give them spiritual authority. Remember this, my dear young brothers. You will never have spiritual authority in all your life if you have not learned submission to spiritual authority at some time in your life. You can grow up like a lot of believers have grown up as a law unto themselves, and they have never, they've been, particularly if you're clever and educated, I've seen many cases like that, even among those who believe the new and living way. They miss what God has for them because they have not known what it is to submit to spiritual authority. And therefore they lose out later on in life. See the training that Jesus had for 30 years to submit to authority. See the training that Joseph had as a slave to submit. Later on, he elevated him to rulership. Joseph, by the time he was 30, had learned that lesson. Jesus, by the time he was 30, had learned that lesson. David, by the time he was 30, had learned that lesson. The tragedy is today many people are 40, 45 and they still haven't learned it. And the chances are they'll never learn it. Because God places such tremendous importance on that training that comes through submission to authority in our younger days. Most important. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. And in that training, it says here in verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. And I believe this should be our testimony even if we are slaves. None of us are slaves. A slave's lot was terrible. He had no salary, no rights, no trade union to protect him, nothing. He had absolutely no rights. Our lot is much better than his. But it says the Lord was with Joseph. And so he became a successful man. And his master saw, verse 3, that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. If we honor God, God will honor us in such a way that the people we work for will see that God is with us. Nobody can stop God from being with you, even if you're a slave. That doesn't depend on what your boss is like. Nobody can stop God from being with you in the church. No elder brother can suppress you if God is with you. Potiphar couldn't suppress Joseph. If a man honors God, God will honor him. But he's got to humble himself and submit to authority. And God was with him. And people saw that God was with him because whatever he did prospered. What a tremendous testimony. That should be our testimony, brothers, in our place of work. A wife who does not know how to submit to the authority of her husband, I can tell you this, when your children grow up, you'll never have authority over them. It's the same principle. Because in the days when your children were not grown up, you never took it seriously to humble yourself under your husband's authority. Then you got only yourself to blame. Just like I said, these young people who are a law unto themselves and grow up and never have spiritual authority in their lives. Remember that. We all like to have authority over others, but we can't have it until we first learn to submit to the authority that God places over us. And so we see here that the Lord was with Joseph because he submitted to the authority that God placed over him, which was Potiphar, who was an unconverted man. And God was with him and blessed him. We read here in verse 6 and verse 4, Joseph found favor in his master's sight, and he was given more responsibility. And it came about that from the time he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. And thus the Lord's blessing was on all that he owned. It's amazing how the Lord blesses others. Where we go, if we honor him, the whole household is blessed. Verse 6, he didn't concern himself about anything, but left everything in Joseph's charge. Now Joseph was handsome, the last part of verse 6, in physique, in form, and in appearance. That means he had a good physique and he was good looking. And he was a spiritual man. We've often said that our physical features and our face has no spiritual value. That doesn't mean that you have to be ugly in order to be spiritual. And doesn't mean you've got to be fat and sloppy in order to be spiritual. Joseph was a spiritual man and he had a good physique. And he was good looking, but he wasn't proud of his good looks. It's exactly the same thing we read in 1 Samuel 16 about David. That David had a good physique and he was good looking, but it didn't go to his head. It says that about Esther in the book of Esther and chapter 1 or 2, wherever it comes, that she was good looking and she had a good figure, but they didn't go to her head. That's the point. So there were spiritual men and women in the scriptures who were good looking and physically attractive and with good physique, but it didn't go to their head. And that's an example for us to follow. Joseph was handsome and it didn't go to his head. Didn't spend his time admiring himself in the mirror. Verse 7, and came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, lie with me. Here is a test. Joseph was tested as a servant, and then he was tested in the area of purity. God allowed him in his sovereignty. Remember, God is sovereign. He sees where the Ishmaelites are going to sell Joseph. And he says, I must let that house where there is an evil woman. Think of that. Couldn't God have kept him from that house and allowed him to be sold in some other house where the wife was a better lady? No, he had to be tested. And you and I have to be tested in an office where there are evil women, perhaps. God is allowing it to test us, to see. God allows those people with whom we have to deal. He has sovereignly ordered our circumstances so that we find ourselves in that situation where we have to deal with evil people. And then our morality and our purity is tested. And it says here that she kept on calling him. She looked with desire. Sin in this area always begins with the eyes. When you look, and you begin to look with desire, and the desire is not pure. That's why one of the most important things we need to warn young people about is be careful how you look at the opposite sex. Very, very important. The descendants of Potiphar's wife are many who look with desire. And there's something about the way she looks, and it finally led to her inviting Joseph, and he refused and said, verse 9, there's no one greater in this house than me. How can I do this evil and sin against God? He says it doesn't make a difference whether Potiphar is here or not. It doesn't make a difference whether other people are here or not. He knew about the hidden life long before even the old covenant was established. How can I commit this sin against God? That's the point. God is watching me. How can I do this sin against Him? And that's what made Joseph a successful man. He did not live before Potiphar's face. He did not live before the face of men. His parents were not there. His brothers and sisters were not there. He was all alone in a strange country. Think of a young 17-year-old or 18-year-old handsome young man in a strange country, far away from his parents, far away from brothers and sisters, far away from believers, all alone in a heathen home, no meetings to attend, and living before the face of God. In the Old Testament, before the law was given, amazing. You really have to admire the way this man lived. Joseph. Long before the Old Covenant was established, he keeps himself in purity and in the fear of God. No wonder he grew in wisdom.